welcome. I'm Asuma Kataoka and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines. The Kremlin has said that many questions must be resolved before a planned Putin-Trump summit in Hungary, while Russia has claimed new battlefield gains in eastern Ukraine, announcing the capture of Pischane and Taiki in Kharkiv and Privilya in Dnipropetrovsk regions. Ukraine had earlier recaptured 3 years ago. Greek authorities have found the bodies of 2 women on the island of Chios after a makeshift boat carrying 29 migrants met with an accident today. The tragedy highlights the ongoing danger of migrant crossings in the Aegean Sea. The Kremlin has said that many questions must be resolved before a planned Putin-Trump summit in Hungary, while Russia has claimed new battlefield gains in eastern Ukraine, announcing the capture of Pischane and areas Ukraine had recaptured 3 years ago. The United States and Brazil have stated that they aim to arrange a meeting between President Donald Trump and President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva as soon as possible after positive trade talks in Washington. The discussions were attended by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Trade Representative Greer, and Brazilian Foreign Minister Mauro Vieira. Chinese exporters are shifting away from the U.S. market amid tariffs and trade tensions, with many saying they have given up on American buyers. Despite this disruption, China's exports rose 7.1% to $2.8 trillion in the first 9 months of this year, as companies turn to Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa to offset U.S. losses. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton has been criminally indicted by a Maryland grand jury and on federal charges related to the mishandling of classified information, making him the 3rd Trump opponent charged in recent weeks. The 76-year-old faces up to 10 years in prison per count as he vows to prove his innocence. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has stated that Pakistan is ready for dialogue if Afghanistan fulfilled Islamabad's justified conditions following recent cross-border hostilities between the two sides. Iran's Supreme National Security Council Chief Ali Larijani has met with President Vladimir Putin in Moscow to discuss bilateral relations and cooperation following the recent strategic partnership treaty between the two countries. Now we start from U.S. U.S. President Donald Trump has said in an interview that the United States is aiming for a fair trade deal with China. He has added that while Chinese tariffs has been a challenge, he believes the situation will be resolved and that current measures, including the 100% tariff, are not sustainable. President Trump has also mentioned that China is constantly looking for an edge in trade negotiations and that he will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in the coming weeks to discuss the way forward. President Trump has stressed that U.S. officials will continue monitoring developments and ensure American interests are protected. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us again. Now we know that China has many cards to play, including the recent news about the rare earths as well, limitations in rare earths as well. So what do you think, what are the cards that U.S. can play, President Trump can play in upcoming summit?
The tariff related to negotiation between the U.S. and China, indeed, originally it has started when President Trump was president at the first time, which is since 2016. So that's why in 2020, President Trump lost the election and 4 years gap is exists. So during that time, China has prepared this situation very much. And in this, what U.S. want to do and what U.S. can do, there is a gap. even if to prepare the confrontation with China, the United States want to decouple with China. As a practical manner, it is not easy to do. So this is a long-term process, and the decoupling process is one by one. It has achieved indeed, but still the United States needs some time to achieve the goal they set up. And during that time, of course, China tried to retaliate against the United States, and China's dominant status in the global free trade market, supply chain, or the providing rare earths in these many cards China has, and China start to use it one by one. So that is the reason this tariff war has happened between the US and China. The US hasn't got enough level of the advantages in the negotiation because China prepared well. This is indeed very serious because 30% of the US weapon use made in China parts, and including the rare earths indeed. So even if the confront with China, indeed the United States cannot make the weapon without supply chain of China. So that's why the US need to do, want to do, but still US needs a time to do.
Right. And what impact could this proposed upcoming meeting between President Xi and President Trump have on the current tariff standoff and broader economic tensions between these two countries? What do you think?
Because the United States needs a time, one time is to adjust a new situation between US and China to decouple, or another situation is before the US focusing on China, that they need to solve the issue in Europe and the Middle East. That's why the negotiation next time could be one kind of the extend ceasefire time more between US and China. So that's why the view from the market, view from the other business related people, this is relatively good news. Still, the US-China tariff war could be a little bit slow pace. But anyway, in the near future, it will escalate. That is a promise, I think. So that's why anyone in the world should or must adjust a new situation and prepare for the future.
With that, I would like to thank Dr. Satoru Nagao for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. With the war in the Middle East now heading towards a concrete solution, the focus is now on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has touted his capital city Budapest as a possible venue for the next round of face-to-face talks between President Vladimir Putin and American President Donald Trump. With this, a gamut of speculation has again erupted, as Hungary is a signatory party to the Rome Statute and is bound by its membership to arrest Russian President Vladimir Putin when he steps onto their soil, owing to an outstanding warrant issued by the International Criminal Court. The European Union has placed its support firmly behind this meeting, with German government spokesperson even calling for an exception to the statute to facilitate these talks. Here's what EU spokesperson Olof Gill has said about this possibility of Putin-Trump summit.
The European Commission point of view and from President von der Leyen's point of view. First, to repeat that any meeting that moves forward the process of achieving a just and lasting peace for Ukraine is welcome. You've heard us say from here many times that it is long overdue for Russia to stop its senseless and illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. From the EU side, we are taking every possible action to support Ukraine, as well as weaken Russia's ability to wage its war.
Here's what German government spokesperson had said about what the call between President Trump and Putin says about the Russian president.
dringend der Druck auf Wladimir Putin für ernsthafte Friedensgespräche zur Verfügung zu stehen erhöht werden. Er reagiert auf Druck, das hat die Vergangenheit auch gezeigt. Das hat vielleicht auch dieses Telefonat, was gestern geführt wurde, gezeigt, dass er auch eine Folge ist von Entscheidungen, oder Ankündigungen der US-Seite. Und insofern ist unser voller Fokus darauf gerichtet, diesen brutalen Krieg, und das will ich vielleicht auch noch mal sagen, der im Anbetracht der Weltlage manchmal ja auch fast ein wenig in Vergessenheit gerät. Jeden Tag werden dort Menschen in der Ukraine getötet, ja, werden Städte mit Angriffen überzogen. Es ist ein brutaler Angriffskrieg, der dringend zu einem Ende geführt werden muss, dringend.
For this discussion, we welcome Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us again. Good to see you. Mark, this news took me by surprise because I was thinking that they might go back to Turkey for upcoming discussion. But how surprised were you about Budapest hosting a Putin-Trump summit, given that Hungary's legal obligations under the Rome Statute, as well as the ICC arrest warrant against Putin? And what do you think? What does this suggest about EU support for this meeting about its current strategy and priorities?
Suma, good to be with you. I think we have to throw in the history of Hungary. We have to then talk about Viktor Orbán, the leader of Hungary, with his background, which is very interesting. And once being arrested by communist authorities, he is also leading Hungary because he believes in freedom, even though he has a very strained relationship with the EU, because Hungary spend millions of dollars a day paying in fines because they have a very tight immigration policy into Hungary. And saying that, Hungary is also buying its energy, its oil, from Russia. It has a relationship there, which I believe is why it's also stepping forward to say, look, we can facilitate this in regard to the ICC, in regard to The Hague, that legality, if we just push that aside before everyone goes, but this is very important. What is important is having a discussion to work hard to end this war. And Viktor Orbán bridges a relationship with Russia and also with the European Union. So I can see why they've stepped forward. And in many ways, I think I give all credit to Hungary for, in fact, doing so. If you look at the past speeches within the EU, you look at the discipline that the EU has then come against Hungary. Hungary as a country, it's landlocked, it's dependent on countries around it. It is keen to be trading, and it believes in getting on well with the countries around it, and particularly with Russia, because of course history plays a part, which is history they don't want to repeat. Hence why they want to see this war end with the invasion by Russia in February 2022 into Ukraine. Asuma.
Mark, thank you very much for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, the European Union is urging dialogue to restore democratic values in Madagascar following a military power grab. The EU is closely monitoring the situation and has called for all parties to engage in talks aimed at returning the country to democratic governance. European Commission spokesperson Anwar El Anouni has emphasized that the importance of dialogue during a press conference in Brussels on Friday. Let's listen into what he has said.
Quand il s'agit des événements à Madagascar, nous suivons de près ces événements en cours dans le pays. Nous appelons à un dialogue entre toutes les parties prenantes en vue de renouer avec les valeurs démocratiques.
Now, for this discussion, we're joined by Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you, Mark, for staying with us. Now, it's very interesting to see European countries coming together and commenting on the situation in Madagascar. Can you shed light on what's the connection between Madagascar and EU, particularly with France?
Well, because up until 1960, when Madagascar got its independence, because it was part of French territory, it's the French Empire in that sense. That's why there is that relationship with France. And again, I've been saying on the channel earlier in the last couple of days when we've been addressing this subject, again, we have to look at the history of Madagascar in regard to democracy, look at it around about 1972 when it's deciding to go towards the Soviet Union construct. We look at what the Soviet Union, then communism, has been up to in that part of Africa for a long time, which is a subject for another day. But that's why the history, Asuma, is there. And I would also say I think the EU needs to look at what has been happening in Nepal, what has been happening in Sri Lanka, and if they're also that worried, then maybe look at what is breaking out in Peru at the moment as well. And if we go back to Madagascar, remember that it's been said that it's the Gen Z generation that have risen up and have got fed up with the fact that they're concerned about the lack of electricity, water, and they're not opportunities for the island there of Madagascar, which is off the coast of Mozambique. So again, we have to look back. Why have we arrived at this point? It was a French protectorate, it was part of the French Empire up until 1960, Asuma.
And what do you think now that our army or military chief has taken over, what do you think will be the challenges that Madagascar will face to become a democratic governance, a peaceful country?
Well, as your colleague Pierre we were talking about yesterday or the day before, where it's this whole thing that when countries have coups, it doesn't it doesn't look good for a long period of time. It takes time to settle down because you have then overthrown this with violence. So I think really we're just going to have to sit back. Time will tell, but also that's why the EU leaders are saying the comments that they're saying, and we can have a long discussion about democracy and what they actually believe in. But that's another thing, especially with the way they conduct themselves in the European Union. But time will tell. But the last thing we want is the continuation of violence. We want Madagascar, like many countries that are in this position, to do well. But when you've seen this, when this particular, the army then switched from one side of backing the Prime Minister to another, we have to ask ourselves, what is in it for them? What do they want out of this themselves? And very often that may not seem to be good, because once they've grabbed power, will they then hand it back to the people and have a democratic vote, which is then overseen and is a proper democratic vote, to then be able to move forward, to then put the power back into the hands of the people. As I say, time will tell, but it also takes great courage to then work through the present situation that they are in. Asuma.
Thank you very much, Mark, for sharing that insight as a geopolitical commentator. Now we move on to our next news. A Polish court has refused to extradite a Ukrainian suspect to Germany, allegedly involved in sabotaging the Nord Stream gas pipelines, and ordered his immediate release. However, the ruling can be appealed. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk has applauded the decision in a post on X. The explosions that damaged the Nord Stream lines occurred in September 2022. 7 months after the beginning of Ukraine war. Judge Dariusz Lubowski has said that the Polish court had no evidence and that Germany provided only very general information. He has also argued the sabotage was a military operation that was not illegal, claiming that the act was carried out on behalf of Kyiv and therefore only the Ukrainian state could be held responsible. Let's listen into what the judge has said.
Ukraińscy żołnierze i wszyscy działający w ramach sił zbrojnych Ukrainy, także sił specjalnych albo na zlecenie sił specjalnych, nie mogą być uznawani za terrorystów czy sabotażystów, albowiem realizując wszelkimi sposobami cel, jakim jest obrona ich ojczyzny, osłabiają wroga. Wysadzenie infrastruktury krytycznej dowolnego państwa w czasie pokoju przez wrogie służby specjalne czy grupy terrorystyczne są sabotażem i stanowią przestępstwo sabotażu. W artykule 607p paragraf 1 punkt 5 Kodeksu Postępowania Karnego. Obrona jest to...
Now for this discussion, we go back to Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for staying with us. Now, looking at this news, how might this ruling affect relations between Poland, Germany, and Ukraine, given the sensitive nature of the accusations and also the ongoing conflict that's still ongoing?
A great question, very sensitive, and I'm sorry that I can't see the Polish that was then said, but taking your comments before, playing the judge's words when he's talking about the evidence that was presented, etc. This is, on the one hand, this is, it seems as though it's an open and shut case, but there's also complications, and you are right to raise that, because again, this is about energy coming from Russia into Europe, and how this sabotage was then done. This action was then done. There's a very famous reporter, journalist in America that exposed this at that time. You are right. It's about the sensitivity of what is going to happen between Poland, what is going to happen between Germany, and how this is going to play out. In regard to the Germany, in regard to its energy, in regard to the industrialization of Germany, and in regard to its economy, and of course keeping its citizens warm, that's why at the time there was a sort of a mooted reaction to what had happened at that time, and that then has been, as you said, it's then gone to court and then is played out there, and the Polish have turned around and said the actions that they've said, from Donald Tusk, who's another very interesting individual that people need to look into his past as well. But the key thing is, I think behind the scenes, this is going to be very touchy, and behind the scenes, the German authorities are then saying we want this individual extradited, because it has put their energy policies, put their citizens in regard to keeping warm in a place that is not good for them at all. Asuma.
Yes, Mark. Yes, I also agree with you. Donald Tusk is an interesting individual. But going back to this, could this decision by a Polish court set a precedent for how states, especially European states, handle alleged covert military actions by allied countries, and what impact could or might this have on future cross-border legal processes?
Again, a very good question. The point is, as I come back to this, I don't fully understand what evidence was put forward. What we do know is that this action took place. What we do know is that this has affected Germany on a number of different levels. Well, it does seem around the world that we see the weaponization of courts, of judges, and are they in a position to be able to weigh up the facts and give the reason for that, and that to be accepted by both sides. And as you quite rightly say, in this case and in others, it's political. We don't fully know what has gone on behind closed doors. Has anyone put pressure on this particular judge? I'm not accusing that. It's because other evidence elsewhere in situations, you wonder about these things. Remember, of course, within Poland as well. They've had these drones that have come over. They assume from Russia, fighters have gone up in the air. We looking at where Poland is. Also, the fact that they are then looking at how their own defenses, etc., in regard to dealing with supporting Ukraine and then dealing with Russia. There are all of these things in the mix. But you and I hope, we always want our judicial systems around the world, in whatever country, to be fair, to not be influenced by outside influences, not to be influenced politically. We would hope for that. But in this case, like many, we can't make those assumptions.
Yes, indeed. This case still lacks a lot of transparency, I agree. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us and sharing that insight. Great learning from you. Now we move on to our next news. A prominent Italian journalist had been threatened by the mafia, and his parked car was blown up by a bomb overnight, causing no injuries but sparking widespread outrage. Sigfrido Ranucci's vehicle was destroyed by the explosion in Pomezia, near Rome, which also damaged the family's other car and the house next door. The force of the explosion was so strong that it could have killed anyone passing by at that moment. Anti-mafia prosecutors in Rome are investigating this attack in Ranucci, who has lived under police protection for several years due to death threats. The Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has strongly condemned this attack and called it a serious act of information. Justice Minister Carlo Nordio has said that an attack on a journalist is an attack on the state, while the Interior Minister Matteo Piantedosi has said that he had ordered an increase in the journalist's security to the maximum. Now we move on to our next news. A huge number of mourners were injured in a stampede at the state funeral of Kenyan opposition leader and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, as the crowd surged to view his body. Odinga has commanded a passionate following in the East African nation, and his memorial ceremonies have attracted huge crowds. 3 people were shot dead by security forces a day earlier when mourners breached a gate of the stadium hosting a public viewing of his late body. Odinga, a major figure for decades in Kenyan politics, who was once a political prisoner and ran unsuccessfully for president 5 times, has passed away on Wednesday. He was 80 years old and he was in India, where he had been receiving medical treatment. That's a wrap on the World Report. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.